Okay, so we have been talking about the church lately, the last few weeks. We talked about the nature of a church, what a church is, a called out local assembly of believers assembled together to carry out the Great Commission. We talked about what that mission was, the Great Commission and things like that. And talked about the service in the church. So we sort of talked about what is a church do, and then service in a church. And today we're going to talk about stewardship, and that's a loaded question. We'll sort of define like this, and don't go all scared and say, oh no, Steve's going to talk all about how we're not giving enough. That's not, we're not going to go there. I'm not going to try to guilt anyone to put more money in the offering plate. That's not at all what we're going to do here. But we'll start with this question. How many of you got a will? Okay, most of our military folks do. Most of them, that's one of the things they make you do, right? Is get a will. So we're going through that process, my wife and I, of getting our will updated. We actually have a will, but it's 40 years old. As a matter of fact, it tells what should happen to our kids should something happen. And now our kids are in their 40s, and they have kids, they're teenagers and things like that. So that's how long. So we've been going through this process of getting a will, and one of the suggestions is that we set up a trust. And so that when we die, not only will it take care of that, but our money will go into a trust, and that's things like that. And in order to have a trust, you know what you got to have? An executor. A trustee is what they call it. So it's an executor if you have a will. That's just legal jargon. It's an executor if you don't have a will. If you have just a will, and then if you put in a trust, they replace the executor with a trustee, and it's basically the same job. There's a few legal distinctions, but it's basically the same job. And so what's the job of a trustee?
To execute the trust as dictated and within the confines of the law.
Ah, bingo. To execute the trust, I forget all the words you said there, but within the dictates of the law, to execute the trust as specified by. Who gets to determine what a trustee does? The person setting up the trust, right? So a trust is a vehicle by which you give authority to someone else to act on your behalf. And of course, when we're thinking of end-of-life stuff, why do you need a trustee? Because you can no longer act on yourself, you're dead. Okay, so you need a trustee who's going to act, but there's a constraint there. Well, first of all, it has to be there's some legal constraints, but even deeper than that, it's the idea that the trustee can't just do whatever he wants, right? He has to be acting not on his own behalf, but he has to be acting upon the behalf of the person who set up the trust, the person who gave the authority. He is merely the executor. That's why we call it, in a will, we call it, the executor of the will. It's that idea that they don't get it the way they want. They have to do what they're told through the will, or through the trust and the legal requirements and what. And so that's what we're sitting there saying. Well, we want this to go to this. We have a standing joke in our family that my daughter gets the jewelry, and one of my sons gets all of my books. I have an extensive library of books that no one but me ever cares about, and so this has been a running joke in our family for 40 years since we set up the last will about who gets the books, and each son says, well, in the sense of brotherly love, I'll let you take the books, and the other says, well, thank you very much, but you're the oldest, why don't you take the books? And then they'll turn to my daughter and say, well, you get the jewelry, why don't you take the books? And so by the way, if any of you want the books, I'm happy to write you into the will, and you could have the books, okay? Carl's sitting there saying, that sounds like a pretty good idea. Carl, like me, is a book guy. So whatever Patty says, not so fast. That's exactly what my wife said, not so fast. Okay? So the big idea is that the trustee can only act in the manner prescribed by and in the best interest of the person who set up the trust, right? That they cannot do what they want. They're legally bound to do the will of someone else. And they're to care for it as if it is their own. In the case of a trustee for a will, it's there's legal ramifications if you don't and things like that. And you sort of got to work through all that as you're figuring out who's going to be the trustee for You know, we're sitting there saying, well, we want to be this son, do we want to be this son, do we want to be a daughter? You got to, you know, figure out all that kind of stuff. So that brings us to the idea of stewardship, because a steward is actually another term that's nearly identical to the idea of a trustee. And it's by no means unique to us in dying either, right? There's other trustees. Companies tend to have trustees. The church has trustees. There's all sorts of trustees around and the same constraints hold, right? Those trustees are, in the case of the church, the trustees are to act in a legal fashion. They're a legal identity that Virginia and the feds recognize, but they can't act by themselves. They're chartered to act in the best interests of the church and at the discretion of the church.
Isn't a steward got to be over money?
No. Although that is the way that we typically think of a steward. And so we'll actually talk about that right now. Once again, you're a great straight man, Ronnie. Merriam-Webster, so I looked up stewardship in Merriam-Webster online dictionary. It says, stewardship is the careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. The careful and responsible management of something entrusted to one's care. Dictionary.com says it a little bit different. It says the job of supervising or taking care of something, such as an organization or property. And the word steward or stewardship appears in the Bible several times. And so I thought it would be interesting to talk just for a second about the way of the couple. There's actually two main words that are translated steward sometimes. One word, in the New Testament at least, it's the Greek word epitotropos. Don't quiz me on the Greek. I'm not a Greek scholar. It's not that's important. It comes from the words epi, which means upon, and the word trepo, to direct. But it has the direct then translation of one to whose care something is committed. And it's usually translated steward then. Sometimes it's translated guardian or tutor even. It's translated tutor because of the practice that they would have, that as you have young people in the house, and if you're wealthy enough, what you would do is hire someone to help train them. Tutor had the idea of more than just book learning, although that would be part of it. It would be that they would train them and things like that. Now, I know you guys are all born from wealthy families, and you had nannies taking care of you and things like that. I didn't, you know. So you're all very used to the idea of having a tutor or a nanny or, you know, someone who is in charge of you because mom and dad were off doing mom and dad things. So the word steward has that kind of connotation of someone who's taking careful and responsible management of something, whether it's finances or often the job, if you will. You know, the steward would be the one who runs the household. Or the kids, or something like that. And as a matter of fact, the idea of running the household is the other word that's translated steward. And the two words are, while they don't sound similar, the two ideas are very linked together. That's the word.
Trustee is not in charge of anything.
They are entrusted with something. They are entrusted with something.
If you're the steward of the stock portfolio and your brother's the trustee, the trustee cannot dictate.
So the trustee, and I don't want to make too big of a distinction between trustee and steward in today's legal jargon, but the basic concept is the steward or the trustee is someone who's responsible for taking care of something on behalf of someone else. So to use an example, you know, the neighborhood kid comes over to your house, okay? You are a steward of that child while they're at your house, right? You are responsible for, if they're off doing mischief and things like that on your watch, that's your bad. That doesn't mean that you have total responsibility. You have responsibility as delegated for that situation. And that's the idea of being a steward. A steward doesn't own the thing he's taking care of. but he's to treat it like it's his in taking care of it and acting in concert with what the master, the actual owner, wants him to do. That other word, it's translated steward, is from oikonomos, and it literally means the manager of a household or the manager of an estate. Comes from two words that are house and arranger. So, and in the scriptures, when you see the word steward, it's sometimes literally meaning the manager of the household, but more often it's using that in a metaphorical way to mean something bigger. But that idea, the idea of someone is to be taking care of someone else, someone is to be taking care of things on behalf of someone else. And a couple of times, it's actually translated a little bit different a couple of times. In Galatians 4:2, it has the term governor, but it's the same idea, that a governor is supposed to be the one that is, back then, you know, if you're British, you're British, right? You have a British background. You know, a governor is a sign of familiar respect or something like that, but it's the idea that a rich household would have a governor who runs things and takes care of the kids and takes care of the household and things like that, one who's in charge of the children of the family. Another case, it's Romans 16:23, it's the treasurer of his city. Okay. What's the treasurer of a city do?
Manages the finances of the town.
It manages the finances of the town. Is it his money? Is he treated like his money? Well, depends what you mean by treated as his money. He's to treat the money as well as he'd treat his own money. On the other hand, it doesn't mean he can just dip into it for his own needs, right? Now, you know, you all read the headlines. You see a lot of stuff that doesn't follow quite that thing. But the idea is that the treasurer of a city is supposed to manage the finances of the city on behalf of the city. He can't have every citizen, you know, meddling, but he's to treat it as if it was his own in the sense of taking good care of it, but he's doing it in the way that someone else, the citizens of the city, want it done. Okay? We usually think of, as Ronnie mentioned earlier, we usually think of stewardship in the idea of finances, and we'll talk most of our time about that, but it extends in some other areas as well, and we'll get into some of those other areas as well. Lots of areas we won't cover as well, but I really want to sort of bring out the idea, first of all, of stewardship as sort of a world view, if you will. And I'll start it this way. I'll just say, God has entrusted us with some things to our care, has he not? And we'll look at some scriptures to back this up in a minute. Okay, that's the first one we're going to look at. God has entrusted us with some things to our care, as individuals and as churches, right? And he expects us to be good stewards of those things. Well, what would it mean to be a good steward of what God has entrusted us in? Well, it means we should do it for his benefit and in the manner that he prescribes, right? That's what a trustee does. That's what a steward does, is he acts in the manner, the best interests of the person they're being a steward for, and in the manner that the steward prescribed. And usually, depending on how good the steward is, you might give them lots of latitude, or you might have to be very strict. Matter of fact, that's one of the things when we were setting up our trust. They said, well, you know, you can just sort of be real general, or you can be very specific. It's up to you. You get to choose. It's your stuff. Okay? And you could, if you really trust someone, and you can say, okay, it's my stuff, but you can go do what you want. And by the way, I won't care because it's after I'm dead. I should mention, they said, oh, and at the same time, you also need a financial power of attorney. That's before you're dead. So then you really want to be careful about who you pick. And there's, you know, your health care thing. And so you want someone who, you know, won't be too eager to plug, you know, unplug the life support machines at the appropriate time, who's going to take care of your health directives and things like that. We went through this not long ago with my, most of you have had similar experiences. We went through this with my mother-in-law. She was getting on in her years, and you know, it became more and more difficult.
whoever
So when you have an advanced medical directive, that's one of the ways in which you specify what you want, and that works in concert with someone who has a medical power of attorney who would help make those kinds of decisions. Certainly, the more you want specific, you give specific instructions, and that's how you, but this isn't a legal class, so I won't go any further with that. So again, back to our definition of steward, keep this in mind as we talk about this. We're talking about how God has entrusted us to be stewards of His stuff. And that means we are responsible for the care and responsible management of those things He's entrusted with. Well, what's He entrusted us with? That's the million-dollar question. And Ronnie says, well, you know what the first thing He entrusted us with is? Planet Earth. All of creation, as a matter of fact. If you go back to Genesis, right? Genesis 2:15.
He knows we're going to do such a good job.
Yeah. Well, and actually, we ought to speak to that for a second. Genesis 2:15 says, and the Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to dress it and to keep it. Okay? The word dress there means to work or to serve, and to keep means to preserve. So God made Adam the steward of creation, of everything He made. All the stuff, the earth and animals and all that kind of stuff. And said, okay, Adam, you go take care of things now. Now, before the fall, that was a fairly easy task. Adam did have things like identifying, naming the animals and things like that, but taking care of the Garden of Eden was actually not all that onerous, right? It wasn't like you had to get out there with the weed whacker and trim the bushes and things like that. And at the end, you say, wow, that was, hard day. My landscaper, my yard is like 20 feet by 10 feet, and he charges me like $1 million to come and mow it. And I think, this is 10 minutes worth of work. And he says, yeah, but it's my 10 minutes, not your 10 minutes. So back then, caring for the Garden of Eden, but he was to dress it, to keep it, take care of it. The creation was entrusted to him. How'd that all turn out? Well, as a matter of fact, what's the first thing God said? Oh, but there's one rule when you're taking care of this, that tree of knowledge of good and evil, don't leave that alone. And so what's the first thing that Adam did? Well, Eve was, exactly what he was told not to do. So, we know that being a steward, but it is worth pointing out, we sometimes sort of avoid this, God wasn't just saying, don't do that. That was part of the stewardship command that God gave to Adam, right? He said, okay, I'm giving you pretty extensive authority based upon what, my stuff, but there are a few limits to that authority. One of them is don't eat from that tree. And Adam says, oh, well, and the first time God's back is turned, if you will. Just like when you tell your kids don't do something, as soon as your back is turned, well, you can't get anything over on kids. They're just like you, though, right? Shelton and I have had that conversation. Yep, you say, oh, about those kids, and say, well, they're just like you. I think I was having that conversation with your dad not too many years ago. Right. So, and Ronnie started down this path. He says, we're given stewardship over the earth, and we sort of messed it up, and Adam did, and we had the fall of mankind, and that changed the earth, and all of a sudden, stewardship of the earth became a very difficult task, right? As part of the sin curse, we had to tend to the garden, and all of a sudden, it was full of thorns and the sweat of the brow, and man had to labor, and you think life is, how many of you get tired of going to work? You say, wow, gosh, what if I just won the lottery? What if everything I needed was just there at my fingertips? And gosh, what happened in the Garden of Eden when everything they wanted was just there at their fingertips? Well, and we wouldn't be. That's a result of the sin curse in that all of creation is now corrupted. We weren't a very good steward weren't a very good steward of what God did. Now, that does not exempt us from the responsibility of doing our best now to be a good steward. And we should be as responsible as we can with God's creation now. God gave it here for us to use, but we also have to remember we are just the stewards. We are to be good caretakers of what is actually still God's. And that's true. And, we forget about that sometimes as we go through life and we're, struggling to earn a living and do all that kind of stuff. And all this physical creation stuff is still God's. Now, he's allowed Satan his time here on earth. He's allowed man to labor here on earth and things like that. But ultimately, it is still his. And guess what happens when you turn to the back of the book, right? We see God reclaiming what is his and restoring it and returning it to its original glory. The whole book of Revelation is, frankly, the story of how man has messed things up so bad that the earth is imploding. Not physically, although there is a lot of physical implosion, but all the, just society and all the people and everything. He's going to come and repossess it, and he's going to fix it all back up. It's sort of like the guy that, how many of you rented a home out to someone else? Okay, you rented the home out to someone else, and you went away like on TDY or on, extended duty or something like that, or went on to another tour and then came back, and what happened? The renters just destroyed the house. And that's that's basically what's going to happen, but to the extreme that God has to then say, okay, that's it. We're going to tear this thing down and fix it all back up again, and that's God's right because it's his. Okay, so that's mankind was created to be stewards of God's creation. That was one of the reasons why God created us. Okay, after we're saved, we're called to be good stewards. There's several parables about stewards in the Bible, actually, right? Most of you have probably read some of them. I'll read part of one here. Luke 12:42-46. And the Lord said, "Who then is that faithful and wise steward, whom his Lord shall make a ruler over his household, to give them their portion of meat in due season?" Oh, hey, look at that. It says you're going to reward the trustee, right, if he does a good job. "Blessed is that servant, whom his Lord, when he cometh, shall find so doing. Of a truth," so what that just said is, hey, if the master says, okay, I'm leaving, I'm going to come back later, I'm going to put you in charge, you're now the steward, and he leaves, and he comes back, what does he expect to find? Same way he left, or better even, right? You're to act in his behalf. What happens if he comes back and you're doing your own thing? "Of a truth I say unto you, that he will make him ruler over all that he hath. And if that servant say in his heart, My Lord delayeth his coming, and shall begin to beat the men servants and maidens, and to eat and drink, and to be drunken, the Lord of that servant will come in a day when he looketh not for him, at an hour when he is not aware, and will cut him in sunder, and will appoint him his portion with the unbelievers." There was an old joke about, the boss catches the worker sleeping at the job, and the boss says, "How come you're sleeping?" And the worker says, "I didn't hear you coming." The master says, "How come you weren't doing what I told you to do?" And the servant says, "Well, I didn't expect you to be coming back, or I would be." No, it's the one who's the faithful steward that is doing what he's being told to do, paid to do, and doing it faithfully. Another one of the, and that's a parable to describe us. Once we're saved, we're to be working for the master. We're to be, and just because God isn't sitting here looking over our shoulder, doesn't mean we can just go lollygag and do whatever we want. Here in the example, he says, beating the manservants and maidens, and eat and drink and be drunken, and doing whatever we want. We should be acting like the Lord is coming back right away. We should be busy doing what we're supposed to be doing until he does come back. Matthew 25:14-27 is the parable of the talents. I won't go through all of it, but basically a man has, in the parable, there's talents, and he gives it to one servant and to another servant and another servant and another. One servant invests in and gets a bunch of money back. Another one has a smaller amount, but he invests and gets some money back. And the third one, he only gets one talent, and what's he do? He hides it because he's afraid that if he loses the talent, then it'll be gone, and the master will yell at him. And the master comes back and says, I didn't give you the talent to not use it. You should have been investing it and doing what I told you to do, and scolds him and says, and of course that's a thing to us. God has entreated with us lots of things that we are to be stewards over, right? And we're to be busy being stewards of those things. And some of us have lots of talents, not just financial stuff, but not just talent as the way we think of, singing and dancing and stuff like that. We all have abilities and gifts, and some people have more than others, but we're all to be putting them to use. What about that one that says, I don't have much, so I'm not going to do anything? That's the one that the master is displeased with. For unto everyone that hath given shall be, for unto everyone that hath shall be given, and he shall have abundance. But from him that hath not shall be taken away even that which he hath. Colossians 3:23 and 24 says, For whatsoever ye do, do it heartily, as unto the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of the inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. And one last verse along these lines, 1 Timothy 6:17-19. And in this passage, he's specifically telling people about their lives and how to live their lives, in order to be honoring of God and things like that. And so he's talking to poor people and rich people and big people and little people and things like that. It says, charge them that are rich in this world, that they be not high-minded, nor trust in uncertain riches, but in the living God, who giveth us richly all things to enjoy, that they do good, and that they be rich in good works, ready to distribute, willing to communicate, laying up in store for themselves a good foundation against the time to come, that they may lay hold on eternal life. Says basically, hey, rich folks, you have a special burden on you because you're rich. Be careful that you don't focus on that wealth, because what you really need to be is rich in good works, and goes on with that. So we'll break this into a couple of we'll talk most of what we're talking about, and then we'll go on to some other things, but about financial stewardship. Okay? So, and I broke that into 3 areas. So our financial stewardship is how we earn money, how we possess money, and how we give money. Okay? You all figured I'd get to that giving part. So I'm talking about the Christian. Okay? And the church is the primary context of that. But it's more than just, okay, you guys, put your money in the offering plate. That's not really what we're talking about here, although that's a little piece of it. It's more than that, and it starts with how we earn our money. How do you earn your money? Well, honestly, in a manner that is worthy of our relationship to God. We're to earn money in a manner that is worthy of our relationship to God. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whether therefore ye eat or drink, or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. So that's the scope of what we're talking about. Do we have to earn money? Okay. Why?
The world revolves around money.
The world revolves around money. Why does the world revolve around money? Well, we don't want to delve into financial, this is not economics 101 here, but why do we need money?
Money is just a concept that allows you to barter for things that you want.
Why do we need to barter for things? So money itself, the financial cash part, you're exactly right, is we've invented this concept of cash in order to facilitate the bartering, because we're no longer at the point where we bring in the chickens and then they hand us we hand them 2 chickens and they hand us a bag of wheat or anything like that. We're sort of past that. And nowadays we don't even hand them green stuff, right? No, we hand them digits on our ATM, and they hand us digits back on their. Yeah. So why do we have to work?
Because no one has a right to another person's labor.
Well, so, and that's really the direction we're going to pursue in a second.
America, some people in some countries don't.
Don't they work?
They've got a wall on the ground below.
So certainly some people are blessed in ways other things are. I watched the Beverly Hillbillies growing up. I know how this works, right? Jed was out shooting for some food, and up from the ground came a bubbling crude. Most of you, I don't remember that. Okay, this was a 1960s show in which some hillbillies found some oil on the ground, and so certainly we have that going on. But as a general rule, first of all, why do people have to work? We already really talked about that. Why did Adam have to work? Not this Adam. Why did Adam have to work?
It is good for the mind.
Huh?
It is good for the mind.
It is good for the mind, but why did he have to do it? God told him. Why did God tell him to? Did he have to work at first? Well, he had to tend to the garden. That wasn't a whole lot of work, right? It was growing pretty good by itself. Now, it was still his job to manage it and take care of it, and he had to name the animals and things like that, but that wasn't the sweat of his brow, right? What happened after the fall? He had to work to survive. As a matter of fact, that was part of the curse that was pronounced on him. It says, you're going to toil, and the earth wasn't going to cooperate. It was going to be full of thistles and thorns, okay? And guess what? Your work is probably, no matter how much you love your work, it's full of thistles and thorns, isn't it? Now, maybe not literally thistles and thorns, although for some of you it might actually be thistles and thorns. But work is work. Okay, that's why we call it work, right? It's that 4-letter word. It's work. It's hard on us. It's labor, and that's a result of the sin curse. It wasn't that hard before the sin curse, but God says, as a result of the fall, one of the things you have to do, man, is labor. And women actually had an additional part. That was that thing we called labor as well, right? And there were other parts of it and of the whole thing, but that's the basic idea, was that once creation, that we had to work for a living. Now, let's take that for today. Why do we work? You said it was God's command, but it's also a necessity, right? What if you don't work? You don't eat, as a matter of fact. Okay, so let's read the verse in Genesis so we don't skip over that too fast. And so the answer is we all must labor, and Christians aren't accepted from this, right? We all must. Genesis 3:19, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For out of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return. Whoa. There's several other verses that emphasize the idea that we must work. I just picked one here. From 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if any would not work, neither should he eat. For we hear that there are some which walk among you disorderly, working not at all, but are busybodies. Now them that are such we command and exhort by our Lord Jesus Christ, that with quietness they work, and that they eat their own bread. Now, let's not take this out of context. That doesn't mean that there's not a place for charity and people that physically can't work and things like that. We're commended to have love for other people, to care for other people, provide for people generously. We're going to get to that in a little bit, for people that honestly can't work. So I'm not saying there shouldn't be a place for welfare, welfare in the general sense, for compassion, for helping out other people. We have a fund in this church in which we use to help out people that are at a point where they need some help, and we think that's all very appropriate. But the general rule here is, if you're just goofing off, well, two things it points out. First of all, if you're just goofing off, what happens? Well, that's the second thing. What's the first thing? You start to become busybodies, don't you? Busybodies in the general sense. You start getting into stuff you shouldn't be. Okay? So work does have the benefit might not be the right word, the consequence. Work has the consequence of it keeps us busy, because when we're not busy, we become busybodies. We get into trouble. And in this case, yeah, and that invariably ends up in sin. Now, he's specifically talking about, people that get backbiting and telling rumors and all that kind of stuff, but that's a general rule. Idle hands are the devil's playground. You might have heard that kind of expression. We work because, when we had a life of leisure, what happened? We blew that. But it isn't just God's punishing us. It's his way of getting us focused on what we need to be doing. And then that second thing, we don't eat. It says, if you don't work, you don't eat. And sort of the corollary is that the more you work, the better you can eat, right? If you're a hard worker, you do well. Now, we all know how life works. Not everyone has equal abilities and talents and opportunities and things like that. And some people get a lot more from working a lot less than other people, and that's just the way that life is. But nonetheless, the general principle is there that if you want to work, if you want to eat, you need to work. Again, we'll provide for people that can't, and widows and orphans and disabled, and the people that can't take care of themselves. That's not what it's talking about.
Work tends to focus us on service to others.
Yeah, it does. As a matter of fact, and we'll, again, I don't want to make this into an economics 101 and the virtues in my mind of capitalism, but what happens? Work focuses on serving others, right? And I tend to favor economic systems that sort of emphasize that. We do things for others, so they do things for us. We raise those chickens so we can hand them to the guy that did the work of raising the wheat and gives me the wheat. And we do it in ways that are, the better we serve someone else, the better off we are. If I give him really good chickens and not just the crappy chickens, he gives me the really good wheat and I get to eat good wheat. Okay? Adam?
So one of the oldest written texts we actually have is about a person complaining about copper quality.
Yeah.
Back in ancient Babylon, there was someone scamming people because he was selling purposefully poor quality copper.
Yeah. Matter of fact, nothing new under the sun, is there? And there's actually several places in the Bible that talks about, the guy who's putting his thumb on the scale, the butcher that puts his thumb on the scale, and weighing with unfair weights and things like that. Everybody's out to make a buck, and which sort of brings us back around. Labor is not just our earning a living. It's really doing the will of God. And that's why we need to be honest and forthright about it. That's why we ought not to scam the copper or put our thumbs on the scales and things like that. We are working for God. as much as for that employer. We are working for God. Now, is God in that office? No, obviously not directly, but we are in working for that boss. We are doing the will of God. Should we do a good job? Should we do an honest and fair job? Should we give them a good day's labor? Or should we cheat the guy, or sleep on the job, or be shady around the edges, or
reap what you sow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I thought about writing down those verses about reaping what you sow. Okay. We're working for a boss or a company or customers or someone. Everybody has a boss, whether it's, directly a boss in the corporate chain, or the boss is your customers, or the boss is, someone, or if you're really in charge of things, then your bosses are the people that elected you to that position or something. But we're really working for God, and our work that we're doing is being done for Him. Okay, that's on earning. Then there's possessing money. Possessing money is a great responsibility for Christians. It really is. We all think, but man, if only I had a lot more money, life would be good. How many of you ever thought that thought, right? Okay, we buy our lottery tickets for the, with the express thing in mind that, man, if I hit that lotto, life will be cool. I'll have $180 million, or, first of all, all sorts of studies show that's, first of all, the chance of winning the big one you're more like thousands of times more likely to be struck by lightning or something, but literally thousands times.
It's all part of the insanity of war.
Yeah, the insanity of, that's it, the insanity of more. But even they've done studies on people that did win, and what happens? Well, usually their life ends up miserable, and I read one poll that said like 9 out of 10 big lottery winners end up saying that was the worst thing that ever happened to them. Okay.
Your lost family members, that's for
Yeah, you find out you lost. Yeah, all of a sudden everybody's related to you. Okay, Carl just called it the insanity of more, right? Possessing money is a great responsibility for any sincere Christian. Now, God will often bless people and give them wealth. One of the richest men of all time was Abraham. Another one of the richest men of all time was Solomon. God blessed them immensely. One would argue they struggled at times with that. If you look particularly at the life of Solomon, go read Ecclesiastes or something, you think, man, Solomon may have been the wealthiest man. He may have been the wisest man, but there were times in his life he was the most miserable man because of that. 1 Timothy 6:6, there's a bunch of verses that really speak to that, but the one I picked out was 1 Timothy 6, verses 6 to 11. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and is certain we can carry nothing out. By the way, isn't that the answer? I just started this with talking about Lynn and I were making our wills, our trust, and all that kind of stuff. And gosh, the most easiest thing is just take it all with. Turns out that's not an option. Okay? Once you die, whatever's left behind is what's left behind. We didn't have anything coming into the world, and we're not going to have anything coming out. And having food and raiment, let us therefore therewith be content. Let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. We want more and more. Turns out that's not such a good thing to want. That getting it isn't what we expected. It's, what did it say? Temptation and a snare, because we fall into foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil. That means all sorts of evil, all kinds of evil. Which, while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. Oh, people even deviated from the faith because they became overly concerned with material things. But thou, O man of God, flee these things and follow after righteousness, godliness, faith, love, patience, meekness. Fight the good fight of faith. Lay hold on eternal life, whereunto thou art also called, and hast professed a good profession before many things. That verse, O man of God, flee these things, is interesting. That word flee there means not just to run away from. It has the context of to avoid a trap, to escape out of danger. Riches can be a danger. James 1:11 is another one. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, but it withered the grass, and the flower thereof faileth, and the grace of the fashion of it perisheth. So also shall the rich man fade away in his ways. Okay, I have a lawn. I'd already described my lawn. It's, it's not very big at all. It's 10 feet by 20 feet maximum. And a couple of years ago, we had some landscaping done and got it all nice. They came down and laid some nice sod, and it looked perfectly green. The problem is, this is like the middle of August when they laid it, just through a variety of reasons. That's how the timing, and it turns out that's like the worst time to lay down sod. I tried to get it watered, but pretty soon the sun beating down and things like that. And guess what happened to all that? It all died. We all know what happens. Okay? So it is with the rich man. He may look nice and green, and then what happens? Yeah, the sun comes out and it withers away. Just like that lawn, so do the riches. And maybe you die, but when you die, they're all gone. Most of the time, it's even before that, if that's what you're trusting in. Yeah. Hebrews 13:5, let your conversation be without covetousness, and be content with such things as ye have. For he hath said, I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. Now that doesn't mean you shouldn't work hard when it says be content. That doesn't mean you shouldn't always be looking to make your business better and grow whatever you're doing or advance in the ranks or anything like that. It's not saying that. It's just saying if that's what you're putting your stock into, guess what? It ain't going to work. It ain't going to happen. Philippians 4:11-12. Not that I speak in respect of want. It's interesting. Paul is writing this from jail. He's writing this. He says, not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therefore, to be content. Paul, who's sitting in jail, a Roman jail at the time. I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, to be abound and to suffer need. Paul says, I've done it all. I've been hungry. I've had a lot. I've been free. I've been in jail. Contentment isn't on how much you have. It isn't on having a little bit more than what I have now. One of the big moguls of yesteryear, they asked him, how much money, you're the richest man in America, how much more do you want? And he said, just $1 more, always $1 more. Okay, so that's earning money, possessing money. What comes up next? Giving money. Okay, so generous giving of money that they have earned is an important aspect of any believer's service. It is a reflection of the grace relationship they have with God. It presupposes that he or she has given themselves to God in unqualified dedication. Proverbs 3:9 says, honor the Lord with thy substance and with the first fruits of all thine increase. In the Old Testament, they had the tithing system. You all know about that. You're supposed to give 1/10 of your goods. And that 10% tithing is done away with. That's not a requirement on us. We live in an age of grace. What are we supposed to give now?
What we are able.
Everything. Our dedication is to everything. Now, that doesn't mean that every week we should just hand over that paycheck to the church. That's not what we're saying at all, okay? But this is more talking about a worldview, a mindset. The mindset is that everything I have belongs to God. Everything I have. I am just the steward of it. Now we return to that idea of stewardship. I am just the caretaker for this thing. Now, it is reasonable for the master to allow the caretaker to use some of the stuff for his own. The caretaker's got to eat too, right? You guys got to eat too, right? You got to pay for the mortgage and the car payment and buy food. And I don't recommend stealing from the food from the grocery store. They frown upon that, okay? Especially Christians aren't to do that. We're to be good, forthright, honest, generous, and what we have we're to pay properly for. So God allows us to have our own substance. We're the caretakers, and He's providing for the caretakers. But we must have the mindset that we are just the caretakers. We are caring for God's stuff. Our relationship with God, our relationship with money should be reflective of our relationship with God. There's 2 Corinthians is interesting. Paul actually spends 2 chapters talking about this, pretty much, but he sort of goes at it from a little bit different direction. He's just not beating them over the head. He's suggesting to the Corinthians, he gives them an example. He talks about the churches at Macedonia. And he says, we won't read the entire 2 chapters, that's way too long, but it says, "Moreover, brethren, we do you to wit of the grace of God bestowed on the churches of Macedonia." He's not directly yelling at the church at Corinth, but you can sort of get the hint, Yeah, it trickles. He says, "Look at the churches of Macedonia. How that in a great trial of affliction," the churches of Macedonia in the first century were known for their poverty, okay? They were a bunch of poor churches. He says, "How that in a great trial of affliction, the abundance of their joy and their deep poverty abounded with the riches of their liberality." So right away it points out, they're afflicted with, in their great trial of affliction, in their tough times, what did they have? Well, they had an abundance of joy, and they had deep poverty. Those are 2 things we don't normally associate with each other, right? We normally think, man, if I was only out of poverty, if only I had lots and lots of stuff, I'd be really happy. Well, he says, these guys are happiest when they're the most poor. But they abounded under the riches of their liberality. Liberality is how liberal, how freely they are giving of themselves. "For to their power I bear record, yea, and beyond their power they were willing of themselves." Paul had actually gone through there and was collecting money for the people in Jerusalem who were even worse off. And he's subtly telling the Corinthians, Corinth at that time was one of the richest cities in that part of the world. And and even in other chapters of the 2 books of the 2 letters to the Corinthians, he's talking about how there's a lot of rich people in your church. And now he's sort of saying, okay, words he didn't say, but you can sort of hear him apply. You rich people in Corinth, rich people in the churches in Corinth, look at those Macedonians. They don't have anything. And they gave it, but they gave everything when they came through. When he came through and asked them, they gave it through everything. They were willing of themselves, praying us with such entreaty that we should receive the gift. The Macedonians were begging Paul to take the stuff. So here, Paul, take it. We don't want it. Paul's looking at them saying, you guys don't got nothing. And they're saying, no. I went to the Amazon a few years ago. Been quite a few years ago now. And that was one of the things that really struck me. These are literally people that had nothing. All they owned was a little hut and a couple of pairs of clothes and things like that. Dinner tonight was the chicken that was running around yesterday, and we came, and the first thing they said was, "No, come eat with us. Here we'll share everything we have. We'll share with you." Praying us with such intensity that we would receive the gift and take upon us the fellowship of the ministering to the saints. And this they did, not as we had hoped, but first gave their own selves to the Lord and to us by the will of God. And then he really gets down, we'll skip down to verse 9 of, again, 2 Corinthians chapter 8. For ye know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. So, Paul pulls out the ace card, the trump card. You all know the trump card, right? That's the card that beats everything else. What's he say? He says, what about Christ? Was Christ the richest? He was when he was sitting in heaven. He created everything. And what did Christ do? Gave all, made himself the poorest, born into a poor family, in a poor circumstances, and then had all of that taken from, and then didn't have a roof over his head, didn't know where the next meal was coming from, and all of that was taken from him when they took him to trial and hung him on the cross. So he literally gave it all. We sing that song, he gave it all, but we don't really think about what he really did. Paul points that out, that though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor. But why did Christ do that? That ye through his poverty might be rich. Christ, in making himself poor, was able to make us rich. And if we're to be like Christ, what should we be doing? We should be making ourselves poor. I'm not advocating you go empty your bank account. Certainly, God expects us to take care of our families, take care of our needs. He doesn't, he gives to us generously, but we're to have a continual mindset of being generous to others, because in being generous to others, that's when God can reward us. And we ought not to be doing it to be rewarded. This isn't name it and claim it theology where you say, well, if you send in a check to the preacher on the TV, he'll bless it, and the checks will start rolling in at your house. That's not what he's saying. The Macedonian church never got rich in money, in wealth, but they had joy abounding. They had blessings overflowing.
So we're called to give up the reward of having,
Yeah.
receive the reward of giving.
Yeah. It's through our giving, because that's when we're Christ-like. That's what Christ did. Christ was giving, and we are to be giving because we're to be Christ-like. We're to be generous with our money, with our time and talents. And I'm going to leave a couple of minutes to talk about things other than money here. Give you just another verse or two here. So that's the first part of Corinthians 8. By the time we get to 2 Corinthians, by the time we get to 2 Corinthians 9, he says, but this I say, he which soweth sparingly shall reap also sparingly. Corinthian church, nudge, nudge. And he which soweth bountifully shall reap also bountifully. Every man according as he purposed in his heart, so let him give, not grudgingly or of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. I'm told that word cheerful means hilarious. God loves people who, I don't know if you laugh when you throw something in the offering plate or what. The churches are the primary vehicles by which God's people should be giving, not exclusively, but there's other ways to give as well, but that's a main way. But again, that's the main vehicle. But it isn't just finances we're talking about. As a matter of fact, finances are really low on the scale. We only got a few more minutes, but I want to talk about a few of the other things we really ought to be generous with. How about our time? Matter of fact, time is often more important than money. I remember this. I tell this story often. When I first started working, I had a boss. His name was Don Van Armen, and we were talking about like me taking the family back to Illinois for Christmas. And he said, well, you're going to fly or you're going to drive? And I looked at him in shock. I got a wife and 3 kids. And of course, we got to drive. We can't afford to fly, you know. And he says, well, driving there takes a long time. I said, yeah, I can't afford to fly. And he says, yeah, you know, I understand. But keep in mind that there will be a time in your life when you value time more than money. And sure enough, that turns out to be true. And time really is the valuable thing. You can always make more money or spend less money. You can't change the time. And I don't know how many times I've gone through the day and looked back and said, what did I actually accomplish today? And feel a little bit embarrassed that I spent all the time, but I didn't spend the time wisely. I didn't accomplish anything. We should be redeeming the time. John 9:4 says, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. Now, Christ said that. He didn't mean that there aren't any night shifts. Even back then, there were night shifts. But you all get the idea. We're to be productive while we can, because there's a time when we won't be productive. Well, what are we supposed to be about doing? Well, the master's business. We talked about the commission of the church. That's the primary focus for us. Okay? Ephesians 5:15-17. See then that ye walk circumspectly, not as fools. What's circumspectly mean? You all know what the circumference of a circle is, right? That's going around the outside of a circle. So to be circumspect means without drawing attention, to be smart about how you do it, you know, to be wise, not, but not with the bad connotation of sneaky, but that's sort of the idea. We're to walk circumspectly, smartly, not as fools, the verse says, but as wise, redeeming the time because the days are evil. He's reminding us, we're in evil times. Okay, there's evil all around us. We're being busy doing what we're supposed to be doing and doing it smartly, doing it wisely, doing it persistently. We're to be good laborers. Wherefore be ye not unwise, but understanding the will of what the Lord is. Colossians 4:5 has a similar thought. Walk in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time. That's specifically talking, the context of that verse was our relationships with people, unbelievers and people outside the church and things like that, that we're to be wise in how we deal with them, walking in wisdom toward them that are without, redeeming the time. Redeeming means making the best use of our time with them. Okay, and we all have, I didn't write all this down, but we have time, we have talents. We won't go chase all those verses, but there's all sorts of, we all have abilities. Our ability is something that God has made us stewards of. And we're to use our abilities wisely. Every one of you has some ability that needs to be put, or abilities to be put in use to the Lord. Some of you have a lot more abilities. There's some things I have some abilities in. There's some things I suck at, I confess. But luckily, some of you are good at the things I'm not so good at. And together, okay, together we can do it. Okay? We are, our time, our talents, our abilities, we're to be good stewards of all that stuff. And our patience. I'll give you another one. We're almost out of time, and the kids will be up here real soon. So that reminds me of another thing that we are to be good stewards of. Our children. Why do we have children? Well, okay. There's a lot of ways to answer that question, isn't it? When a man loves a woman very much, and, you all know the birds and bees reason why we have children. But why do we have children? Well, to pass on your legacy.
I know it's changed from my time, from my parents. My dad, he said that my grandmother said that all of her kids were born to help on the farm.
Yeah, and I remember the times in which My dad was one of 15, and they were a farm family, and yes, yeah. So they had lots of kids because lots of hands. Yeah, and then it turns out that's a double-edged sword because eventually they grew up and they got a farmland of their own, and so and they have 15 kids of their own and everything. Why do we have kids? Well, kids. Yes, yeah. Why?
There are biological reasons, there are social reasons.
There's biological reasons, there's social reasons. Let's think about the theological reasons why we have children. Be plentiful and multiply. And there's a lot of stuff in that. When we sometimes think of that as just, Adam go and have a lot of babies. And then Adam's babies had babies, and pretty soon we got a whole world full of babies and things like that. But God is entrusting the next generation to us. Our time is short on this earth, and God has a longer plan. And part of that longer plan, He is giving us, entrusting in us people. Little people. That don't stay little people, they grow up to be big people. And to every parent sort of at their heart knows that. This is more than just, okay, I got kids and, now I got to feed them and clothe them and make sure that they're not just, they're not knocking over the 7-Eleven or anything like that. You're really stewards of those on behalf of God. They're God's people. They may explicitly be God's people, or they may potentially in the future be God's people, but God has entrusted them to us. And that's why, and as a church, that's an important thing. We have that we have the Awana program going downstairs. Why are all those Awana leaders down there doing what they're doing? Why did you parents that have kids down in Awana bring your kids to Awana? Well, sounded like a good way to, free day, yeah. Because you were so excited about coming to my Bible study that you thought, kids say, I don't want to go to Awana. So you're going to Awana because I want to go to that Bible study. No, we have Awanas, and not just Awanas, other programs and things like that. We care about children because we are stewards of them for God. We are to raise them, care for them, nurture them on behalf of God. And so we're doing Awanas and the other many things that we do. So we are at lots of verses, I'll only read one. Psalm 127:3, lo, children are a heritage of the Lord, and the fruit of the womb is His reward. The fruit of the womb is His reward. Does He have them yet? Well, we're in this trustee case, this stewardship case, right? They're His, but we're called to be stewards of them. If you really latch onto that idea for everything, but think about kids in particular here, that changes your outlook, on how you deal with your children. You're not just slapping them alongside the head and saying, go earn me a bunch of them. I got to raise you right because you're going to embarrass me, and I want you to go earn a nice paycheck so I can retire at some point. You are stewards of something that God gave you, those precious souls that He just said were precious to Him, and we're to care for them unto God. I'll tell you one other thing. We got just 2 or 3, 4 minutes here. One other thing that the church in particular is stewards of. God's Word. How did you get that Bible today that's in your hand? Carl and Ronnie are rolling their eyes because we talk about this every single week in Sunday school. And Ronnie asks the question and we get going. He says, how'd you get that Bible? Well, we know, that's the particular topic we're talking about now, Bible versions and stuff. God entrusted His Word to men a long time ago. He inspired men to write things down. How did it get from that guy, from Paul or Matthew or Mark or Luke or John, to us today? Well, there's lots of details in there, and if you want details, come to my apologetics class on Sunday mornings. We won't get into that now. But a lot of that was churches handing it, copying it, passing it from one to another. Now, we don't have to do the physical copying nowadays, although for a thousand and some years, that was what was necessary. From the time that Paul wrote his letter, or Matthew wrote his, or Luke wrote his, people had to copy it and give it to other people who would copy it and give it to them and take care of it. And by the way, when they copied it, they considered themselves stewards of it. They had to be very careful to copy it. Exactly. They couldn't just say, well, this is sort of what Paul said, give or take. No, they were trying to be as good as stewards as possible. Well, we don't have to do the copying part now. We got printing presses, and now we do everything digital and all that kind of stuff. But the idea still holds in that we are to be caretakers of God's word. We are to be passing the truth along from generation to generation, from person to person, from place to place. We are to be caretakers of God's word. That's why we're busy translating and doing things like that, is we're in the process of taking it from place to place. So 1 Corinthians 4, 1-2, we'll finish with this. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man, that is, man be found faithful. The mysteries of God, it says. That doesn't mean hocus pocus mysteries. It means, the word mysteries there means unknown to the uninitiated. You know, the things that mystify the unsaved world. It says we are to be stewards of those truths, passing it on, place to place, person to person, generation to generation. That's what a steward does. Okay? So, what's a steward do? He faithfully takes care of the things that he's been entrusted in on behalf of the master. That's what our lives are to be all about, is to be stewards of the things God has given us. Finances, talents, abilities, children, the scriptures, everything. We're to be faithful until the master returns, which could be any time. But when he comes back, we want him to find us doing it well. Okay? With that, we're done. We'll have a couple of minutes and the kids will be up here. So thank you to everyone. If you have any questions, by all means, ask me afterwards. We're happy to chat about it. But there we go. Okay, thanks.